you again this evening and ask your blessing that we can grasp the marvel of your creative hand and the wonderful assurance that gives us that the Word is true and that your plan for us is real. Doubted by so many people today in the world. And we thank you in Jesus' name. Amen. So a little exercise. I am pretending that these are amino acids. And what does the body do with amino acids? It builds protein. So we're going to build a protein together. And there's 7 different colors. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 colors. Unfortunately, they're all the same size. How many amino acids does our body need to make the proteins we need? 20. I told you last night there's hundreds of amino acids that the plants make. We only use 20 of them. So I wish that these were not all the same shape, but we'll pretend that they're different shapes. Each amino acid has its own shape. You understand these are toys for children I bought off the internet. Please don't misunderstand my motive about your intelligence. I'm just, huh? Yeah. So what you're going to do, we're going to build a protein, and it's going to go all around the room, and everybody's going to add their amino acid. And what you want to do is try to do something unique when you add yours. Now, to begin with, all you can do is that. For arthritic hands, it may be a little challenging, but not too bad. So then you hand that to your next neighbor, and just to give you an illustration, you could just go on back and forth like that. Can you all see what I'm doing here? But, go off at an angle. Or a different angle, like that. Y'all with me? Do something unique. And I'll start out here, and let's say that's what you did, and you give it to. Does anybody not have an amino acid? Okay. I think you can come in, dear. Just put them on the back seat there, and and you keep one, of course. Quickly go down the row. Did you put yours on? Quickly hand it on down there. Now you went straight. Don't be so straight. Do different things. I'll tell you what, you guys start one here, and we'll just put them together at the end. So start right here. Start right here. Put your two together. And no. You let them keep those. Everybody puts their own piece on it. Here's your piece to put on that. No, don't make it straight. Do something different. Okay. Yeah, you hand your thing to the next person, and they put theirs on it. That's fine. Hook them together in some unique fashion. Give it to somebody over here, and they'll continue. Hook yours onto that thing any way you'd like.
How are you going to recognize it?
It doesn't matter. You'll see what I'm doing here in a minute. Uh-oh, he broke it. This is bad. It's against the law to break it. Pretty cool.
Isn't that a neat one?
Yeah. Just push it on there.
Yeah, when I do, it pushes.
Well, you have to hold the one you're pushing onto, like that, like she did.
Yeah.
You got to hold that baby. Okay.
My hand's too big.
Okay, ladies, hook these two together. These two conglomerations. Yeah, you can give them one as they come in. I've never done before what I did last night with the ping pong balls. I've never done that before. I've never done this before, so it's all new. Good for you. Oh, it broke, huh? Yeah.
I dismantled it.
Oh, don't dismantle it. Oh, don't do that.
We're being more creative.
Okay, that's fine. Okay, dear, let me have it. He's all right.
Okay.
Now, here is your creation.
Yay!
In your and my cell, the average number of different, by the way, this is a protein. Y'all with me on that? And it can do a job because of its shape. The average number of different proteins that any cell needs is around 200. Maybe 1 million copies of all of them. But there are many different amino acids. 200 isn't correct, but it's a lot. Now let me show you a picture of one that is real. The artist has colored it. Whoops. I thought it was closer than that. Let's see where it is. There it is, right there. This is a protein with how many of these little guys in it? How many? 181,000. Now, the average protein in your cells has around 300 amino acids to make a shape to do a job. Y'all with me? This one and there's a class of these. We'll look at this tomorrow. I think it's tomorrow night. We're studying the cancer question. But when we do, we'll look at this. This protein, can you see my pointer? In this area, it's just one hooked to another. But when you come to this coil, there's hundreds of them hooked side by side in order to make this coil. Are you all with me on that? This particular protein, I'm sorry, the number of amino acids I thought I put on the screen here. There it is. It's 1,800 amino acids. The rungs have to do with the DNA, which I'll come to in a minute. This protein is not a living entity. Only cells are living entities. Are y'all with me? This protein is just a chemical. It's a molecule made up of atoms, right? And each of these little guys, remember, on one end it's an acid, and on the other end it's an ammonia, right? It's an amino acid. And this particular protein, even though it's not alive, can travel down the DNA and fix the errors. This is astonishing beyond belief. The problem is they miss a few. If these things worked perfectly, and there's a whole class of them, y'all with me on this. We didn't even know this till just a few years ago about this class of proteins. If they could do this work, nobody would ever get cancer. There is no exception to this. All cancer is the result of mutations in the DNA. And if it weren't for these guys, I should point to the screen instead of my computer. There is a book written recently by a Nobel laureate called Genetic Entropy. That's a word you and I never use, but entropy just means how much things are messed up or disordered. And he shows in his book, he's a Nobel laureate, y'all with me on this, he knows what he's talking about. He shows in this book that if it wasn't for these proteins, everybody on the planet would be dead within 40 years from cancer. Amazing. And like I say, we've only known about them for a short time. This is pretty good. I think I'll take a picture of this. All right, let me ask you this question. And I'm sorry, Randy, I'm backing up here. Did I make it clear enough last night that my friend Robert Gentry believes that he's proving that the granite, and really the rest of the world, was created instantly because these halos are created in... Now, some of the halos are created by long half-lives, but he showed that there were halos that, you can see my pointer, correct? That the halos were created in seconds or minutes. And if granite had congealed from a melt, these things would never have been there. Y'all with me on that? Did I make that clear? He was actually called to present his theory at that trial. Was it in Texas? somewhere in the South where the local parents wanted the schools to at least teach that there was an option to evolution. You remember that? The big trial that was done? And he was among 10 or 15 creationists who were brought there to show that it's a scientific thing. It's not just some idea. Anyway, I wanted to be sure that you got that. Now, one last funny little thing here. This is a quiz. You all get the answer in your head. You do not say it out loud until I'm wanting you to. I want to know what the electrical charge is on this. How many think you know it? Let me see your hands. All right, let me help you. This thing is called a neutron. So would that help you with what the charge is? The charge would be neutral. What's the charge on this one? Don't say it out loud. How many think you know what it is? Good for you. What is it? +1 unit of charge. Go ahead and tell me what the charge on this is. It's a -1 or an electron. Now, what I didn't show you last evening was, and I want you to, not that this is all that critical for you to know, but I think people ought to know something about these things, don't you? Okay, so you probably wouldn't have noticed this, but whenever the decay, like of thorium, this beta causes thorium to become protactinium. Are you all with me on that? And notice that the weight is the same. Is that correct? Remember, the number at the bottom of the square was the weight, or the mass would be a better term, but weight's okay. And however, it's a different stuff. And if you remember, it's the number of these guys that makes what the element is. If there's just one of these in the nucleus, what is the element? Hydrogen. It's okay, Mommy. You can stay by. It's all right. If there's 2 of these in the nucleus, what is the element? Helium. If there's 92 of these in the element, what is it? Uranium. And so forth. Now, if you remember from last night, beta decay is an electron. Remember that? An electron comes flying out. It actually comes out of the neutron. So the neutron is now what charge if a negative charge left it? It's positive. So now this thing is turned into pink. Right? You got that? This is neutral, but it's actually got a plus and a minus in it. And when the minus leaves, it's an electron. And so now these are both pluses. So when the beta leaves, the weight doesn't change, but the stuff changed because it now has one more pink one. Got that? Now I say pink even though this is orange. I use pink because pink, proton. A proton. That's why I was doing that last night. Neva reminded me that this was not pink. Okay, so just for fun, notice that thorium becomes protactinium. Same weight. The electron is such a tiny weight. You may not remember this. It's 1/1800th of the weight of either one of these. Y'all with me? So when the electron leaves, the weight of this didn't change. It just changed its charge. And so the stuff now became a different element, even though it still weighs the same. You're not too impressed, but it's... Yeah, that good for you. Okay. Now we will carry on with the rest of our slides. Don't know why it's not moving, so we'll do that. Do you remember these guys? Okay. What we're going to deal with now is the problem, or the interesting world of what is called the Cambrian Explosion. Let me see the hands of you that have ever heard the term. Good. About 8 or 10 of you. Let me show you, first of all, a picture. This is a slide down, Jerry, of what we call the Geologic Column. You all know that term, don't you? And this is a real simplified version. It starts down here in what is called the Pre-Cambrian, and then through all these strange names, and finally, this is where man lives. And in all these layers, supposedly, before mankind was here, there were other creatures. You all with me on that? And what do you see in the Pre-Cambrian? No animals. And this fellow right here, the guy that is from Yale, head of computer science, what made him decide that there was a designer was what we call the Pre-Cambrian Explosion. Actually, in the Pre-Cambrian level, there are some tiny living organisms, just one cell. And all of a sudden, in the next layer, are all of these, the way they like to refer to it, and you'll listen to him in a moment, all these new body plans, complex creatures, and there's no precursors to them. Evolution says there should be a bunch of precursors, and you work your way to more and more complex creatures. Y'all with me on that? Here is a place in the geologic record where there's no ancestors or precursors of any kind that suggest why the next ones are there. Y'all with me? I'm repeating myself. Darwin knew about this. And he says in his book, On the Origin of Species, that it is a problem, and he believed that eventually there would be enough fossil finds to show that, oh yes, this is how those body plans came to be. You following me still? Every biologist, every paleontologist today knows that we're not going to find fossils that are, if you will, new to help with this plan. They all understand that there was this thing called the Pre-Cambian Explosion, where suddenly in the geologic column are all of these brand new complex, just as complex, body plans, if you will. And Stephen Meyer, the fellow on the left, I just really love this man. He wrote a book called Darwin's Doubt. I have a copy, I've read most of it. When I say I've read something, it means I look at a paragraph, and if I think I know what it says, I go to the next one. And I want you to listen to him describe this. I may stop and start it once or twice because it's a little tricky to hear him, but here we go.
You know, it was a problem that even Darwin was aware of. He wrote about it in The Origin of Species, that it was inexplicable on his...
It was a problem that Darwin was aware of and wrote about it. He said it was inexplicable. Y'all with me on that? What does inexplicable mean? You can't explain how it got there. Okay, I'll keep going.
View of life. But he felt that the future fossil finds would fill in the missing ancestral forms that were evident. What happens in the Cambrian is you get a huge number of what are called the animal body plans, where a body plan is a unique configuration of body parts and tissues. And they arrive very abruptly in the fossil record without discernible connection to earlier precursors or earlier ancestors in the Pre-Cambrian record.
Does that sound familiar to you? It's repeating what I tried to describe. Y'all with me on that? And now Peter Robbins is trying to get a handle on understanding. He's not this dumb. He pretends like he's a layperson in all these things. But so he's going to ask a question, and then Stephen Meyer will continue.
This wall were the side of a canyon. halfway up we'd see, you have a stripe of rock, and in that stripe you'd find a whole bunch of new forms of animal life.
And in the layers underneath, there would be no intermediate, there'd be nothing leading to
with
that.
any
It just
discernible
pops
connection. Right. And so the Cambrian explosion itself has been differently dated, but increasingly the date that David used of 70 million years is a very generous date for it. The age range is actually narrowing as a result of additional findings. It's now about 10 million years is the increasingly accepted date, and there are major explosions. In one Chinese scene, there's 13 to 16 different major groups of animals that have arisen in a 5 to 6 million year window. It's incredibly abrupt geologically when you consider the age of the Earth is 4.5 billion years. It's also very abrupt biologically, because there's a mathematical branch of Darwinian theory called population genetics that allows us to calculate how much change, evolutionary change, we ought to expect in a given amount of time if we know things like the mutation rate, the generation time, the population sizes. And 5, 10, even 70 million years is a blink of an eye in terms of the calculations that can be made for what are called waiting times. And the expected waiting times for the amount of change that's evident in the Cambrian blow out the time scale, if you will. They're hundreds of millions or billions of years. So this is a really unexpected event, both biologically, mathematically, and geologically on the Darwinian view of things.
Now, let me, in case it would be helpful for me to just comment on what he was trying to say. The Pre-Cambian Explosion, not long ago, scientists thought that was 100 million years. And what he's saying is that's been narrowed to 10 million years. But for you and me as creationists, that's a problem too, isn't it? And I'll relate to that in a minute. But what he's saying is that scientists have figured out a way to calculate how long it might take for a genetic mutation to accidentally take place. And enough accidents would create some new creature. Enough accidents in the DNA. Y'all with me on the idea? And the calculation for that much change to make these body plans that suddenly show awake, which should be hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of millions of years. And it happened in a geologically blink, if you will, of just 10 million years. Now, but it was this Cambrian explosion, I shouldn't say Pre-Cambrian explosion, but the Cambrian explosion is what made the scientist on the right decide that there had to be a designer. Somebody was making this stuff. It could not have occurred by accident. Now, this is just several of scores and scores of creatures that suddenly appear in the geologic column. Well, let me talk for just a minute about what you and I, as young Earth creationists, or maybe you're not, but many Christian organizations believe in a young Earth, and therefore young Earth creation. In fact, for those of you that are members of the Adventist Church, we operate a university in Michigan where the president of the university, many years ago now, when he found out that there was life in all of these other layers going back supposedly millions of years, he decided to throw away his belief in the biblical record. He gave up his position as president, and he was an administrator in training, but he had enough science in his background to understand the problem that he thought he saw. And I think we should face the fact, folks, that there are questions that we don't know the answers to. I have determined a long time ago, even before I started studying science when I was a kid, but before I started studying science in college, I had determined that I was a believer in Jesus Christ and in God, and I wasn't going to let that be shaken by any revelation of any kind. I think that is something that everybody should consider When the Bible says, in the beginning God created the heaven and the earth, it's talking about this earth, and then it says, and the earth was without form, and I don't like the translation. It should also say, and it was empty. What the translation is, the earth is without form and void. It really means it was without form and it was empty, or it was void. Y'all with me on that? Now, it doesn't mean there wasn't anything there. There was rocks and water. That thing could have been around for 1 billion years. I don't know. The scientists think that the universe is about 14 billion years old. And by the way, they base that on the cosmic ray background. How warm the cosmic rays are and how hot they had to be back when they could melt everything tells that they can do calculations and say, it's about 14 billion years old. Because the cosmic background radiation, the cosmic ray background, is slowly cooling down. We think the pictures we've taken in the last 40 years, we don't see any cooling, but everybody agrees that it's probably cooling down very slowly. So, before God created Adam and Eve, were all of these life forms on this planet? I don't know. It's a curious question. Are you aware of the fact that science has to keep changing what it teaches? Are you aware of the fact that science believes that the dinosaurs were destroyed by a meteorite? You aware of that? Because in the geologic column, suddenly they are gone. And they base that on a chemical element that is found in their bodies at a higher concentration than otherwise would have been. And they can show in their argument why an asteroid would have made some of that chemical. And so that's the basis on which they say the dinosaurs were destroyed. They had to change their theory about 2 years ago. Got a new theory now. It's still harping along the same lines, but who knows about all of those layers? Let me show you something interesting about layers. I think it's here. Well, we'll do this one. Nah, I'm going to pass it up for now. Yeah, I'll let you hear him in a minute. But let me slip down here to this series of slides. There is a place in Yellowstone Park called Specimen Ridge. That's the picture on the left. And because of erosion, there has been revealed on Specimen Ridge, layer after layer, maybe 40, 50 feet thick, maybe less or more, of new material in which are buried vertical trees that are petrified. I've been up there several times. I've taken groups of young people up there to see this. And the scientists taught that every one of these layers was brought in over thousands and thousands of years. Dirt and dust pile up and trees grow, and then somehow the trees got wet and became fossilized, if you will. That's really what that is. It's a fossil. And a friend of mine, one of my professors, didn't believe that. Most of us young earth creationists didn't believe that scenario, and I'll show you why in a minute. He got permission from the government and went up and drilled. Let me make sure you understand. A layer of forest, a layer of mud, forest grows, more junk comes in and covers that up, more stuff comes in, a new layer grows, etc. Y'all with me on that? There's up to 50 layers in some places in Specimen Ridge. And they taught for years that each of those layers was thousands and thousands of years, before the next layer would come in. My friend went up and did core samples, and in petrified wood, you can see the rings, you understand that. And he showed that all of those trees and all of those layers lived at the same time. And it really shook up the scientific community because he did good work. They could see that his work was valid. That just says what I said, so I'm going to go on. And there's a drawing of the idea. I probably scared that poor child. So you have trees and more dirt and more trees. That's what they believed took place. But here's the story on the basis of this.
I glanced over at the mountain.
Everybody remembers where they were that morning, don't you? Neva got on an airplane. I had to attend a meeting. We got to the airport and didn't know that in Montana, we didn't know that that thing had exploded. But because that airplane was going to Portland and it looked like the ash was blown the other way. It's not fair. She got to sit on that side of the airplane and watch that whole thing when it was about 2 hours old. It's not fair. And I had to be in a meeting. But Spirit Lake was inundated by the mud flow from the volcano and raised 140 feet and filled with hundreds of thousands of trees. This is an actual photograph. Eventually the trees got waterlogged and started to sink. On the right top picture, they sank feet first. And the drawing on the bottom left is an illustration of what some scientists found. Some of the logs were floating vertically. Can you see the one on the right here? Right there? Y'all with me? And this is an actual photograph underwater of one of them floating near the surface. Are y'all with me on that? And here is a radiograph they made on the bottom left, an actual sonar scan of the bottom of the lake. And a bunch of these trees have settled down on the bottom of the lake vertically. And all of this and this is material that was deposited in a few hours from the volcano. And it is got layers in it that if people didn't know, the scientists would try to tell you that this took thousands of years for these layers to be put down. Here's what the average scientist believes about formation of layers. It's in water, and dirt and dust is slowly making sediment, and it makes a layer. It takes maybe 1,000 years, 10,000, whatever, to make some layer, and then something happens and the water's gone or whatever, and this process takes hundreds of thousands and millions of years. And this was astonishing because all of this stuff you see there was deposited in a few hours. And you can even look more closely and see the different layers. It's astonishing. Just mud moving, folks, makes these layers. Very, very interesting. Now, here's the Grand Canyon. We were there just 2 or 3 weeks ago, I guess it was, and I took this picture. The scientists believe that these layers came in and it was thousands and thousands of years before the next layer was filled with all the water. You understand, folks, that even though they don't believe in a worldwide flood, there is no place on the surface of the earth that does not have marine fossils. Even on the top of Mount Everest. Now, that doesn't mean the water was that deep, but the top of Mount Everest was underwater, or there would not be a marine fossil. Are you with me? Any scientist knows that. They will not debate that question. Now, we believe that uplift with volcanic activity, you guys know this, all the mountains in the Cascade are volcanoes. And that there was probably a flat ground before that mountain was formed by a volcano. So, but the idea that these layers took long times to form is false. And let me show you a little close-up of that. One of the first things we began to notice when people were trying to answer these questions is that all of these layers in the Grand Canyon are absolutely flat with each other. And you know what that means? They were not there very long before the next layer came. Why? No erosion. If that thing had been there for even a few years, there would be erosion. And you go out to the Grand Canyon. It's amazing. Here's what we believe as young Earth creationists. The flood created all these layers. Maybe in a few hours. And eventually, there was a large lake that was formed, probably because, and by the way, the glaciers reached as far south as the Grand Canyon. So you could have a glacial blocked lake. And they think they could see where it would have been, and they give it a name of Lake Olympia. And eventually, the dam broke and created the Grand Canyon in a few hours. You understand what I'm saying? I'll give you an example. Glen Canyon Dam, built in 40-something maybe. In 1963, they had so much water that the dam was going to be overflowed. We wish that were the case today, because Lake Powell, you probably know, it's gotten so dry, it's just pitiful. But anyway, so they opened up the big tubes, 20-foot diameter tubes. There's about a dozen of them. And they were letting water go out at the rate, don't hold me to this number, millions of gallons a second, with all of these tubes running to try to keep the lake from going over the top of the dam, which they felt would probably cause some big problems. And after a while, the water coming out of those tubes started turning red. Even though they were lined with concrete 2 feet thick, that fast-moving water tore up that concrete and was now tearing into the rocks and the soil. They knew they had a big problem on their hands, but that was less of a problem than letting the dam have that problem. And they had to just sit there and watch it. I have pictures somewhere, I couldn't find them today. Once that water was under control and they could shut off those pipes, they went in there with cameras that just tore up the rocks. Rapid moving water, folks, can tear up anything. That Grand Canyon was probably formed in several days when this lake broke. There was a place in eastern Washington, since you don't live there, but you're not that far from eastern Washington. Back in the early 40s, middle 40s, a geologist by the name of Brecht proposed that the entire countryside of eastern Washington was formed in a few hours by a dammed up lake that broke in a similar fashion to what I've just described. He was laughed off the stage. All the geologists today know that that is what happened. It's an amazing story, how scientists can be so wrong. So be careful, my counsel to anyone of my students or any friend like you, even though I can't explain why there was life on earth before Adam and Eve, I've determined I'm not going to let that shake my faith. I'm going to keep studying, keep probing, keep talking to friends in the scientific community that I can learn from, and trust that what the Bible says is true. And if there was life on earth before Adam and Eve were made, I'll bet you dollars to donuts that God made it. Are y'all with me on that? Okay. Let me go back to where we were. Jerry, I'm sorry for all this fooling around here, but we're going to go back now to... we're going to go back to Ben. I'll draw an illustration from this. I've known Ben for over 30 years, and several times I've interviewed him, and this is one of them. And I'm going to have to move the microphone with dexterity back and forth, because the two of us were on two different channels, and somehow they didn't get mixed. So let me do this, and I think I can make it work.
Now, this matter of remembering everything, would I be correct in saying that there is some physical change in the brain, a pathway, if you will, that takes place to record the memory?
Yes.
And when God created Adam and Eve, for those who believe that, did he not intend for them to remember everything they ever saw or heard for eternity?
I obviously he did.
So in a finite space, you can record
Everything.
Isn't this Isn't this mind-boggling beyond belief?
It really is. I tell young people all the time, because I hear people say, don't read that, don't study that, don't memorize that, because there's only so much space, and you'll overload your brain. And I just have to laugh anytime I hear that. I say, within your brain, there is plenty of capacity to take in everything that has ever been written by anybody in the history of the world, and you won't even begin to have taken up all the space. So you really never have to worry about overloading your brain.
Now, let me tell you an interesting sequel to that. I have come to the place, as much as I love and respect Ben, that I don't think that's the case. Now, did you understand my question when I said in a finite space? What's the finite space I'm talking about? The human brain. And what did Ben say? He believed that God intended for Adam and Eve to do what? Remember? Everything they ever? Or? Do you understand that when you're watching this screen and there's something on the screen, do you understand that there's probably about 8 million pixels of light, and that there are 30 frames, there are 30 new pictures every second. And that's quick enough so the eye doesn't see the jerking. So when you see this thing move like that, whoops, like that, it looks fine to your eye because there are 30 pictures made every second. Y'all with me on the idea? Electronics is fast, faster than you can hardly imagine. And I don't know how much space it takes in the brain to store video, i.e. what you see, but it may be something like that. And, well, okay, I took it for Ben's word, but another physician friend of mine was talking to me recently, a year ago now, and he shared something with me that I thought was very, very beautiful. He would not agree that there's that much room in our brain. Here's what he believes, and I really like this. I think this is the case. Our memory, even though in a sense it's in the brain, is actually available because God dwells in us. Now, this is not pantheism. We're not ever God because he dwells there. That's pantheism. Pantheism. It's a diabolical teaching that leads people astray. It's like the cloud. Do you guys know what the cloud is? You're doing stuff on your computer, and if you want to pay the money each month, your whole computer is saved out there somewhere. It's actually in a building with 10,000 hard drives down in Palo Alto. You understand what I'm saying? Of course, the hard drives today are replaced by solid state memory. But anyway, that's very beautiful, friends, that God is so intimately connected with us that, in fact, the Bible says it in a way that is not scientific, but it says, in him we live and move and have our being. Pretty interesting, isn't it? And I said, didn't I talk to you about, yes, last night when God breathed into Adam? It wasn't that he blew air into his lungs that made Adam live. Do you know that the word for air and spirit are the same word in the Bible? In fact, in Greek, I've never studied Hebrew hardly at all, but in Greek, the word for spirit is pneumatos. Is what? Pneuma. What is pneuma? You have a pneumatic tire on your car, right? It means full of air. So the word for God's Spirit, it doesn't mean that God is a bunch of wind, but it's trying to describe that it's something that's beyond our understanding. So let's take a look at the cell a little bit here and see some of these marvelous things. Simple drawing. You can see cell wall. Can you see that it's got two layers, just a little bit, the double line? You remember from last night, the bilipid layer? And you can see the nucleus where the DNA is. We call the pieces of DNA chromosomes. And there's another 3 or 4 structures in there. I think you're familiar with this idea, but in case you're not, you may not know this chromosome, and there's 23 of them. This side of it is from Dad. That's DNA from Dad. And this side is from Mom. Are y'all with me on that? Everybody in this room, our DNAs are almost exactly the same. There's just a few little differences here and there, so people can convict you if you committed a crime and left some DNA there. But essentially it's the same. So the DNA you get from Dad and from Mom is the same. So if there's a gene on here somewhere, it's there from Mommy and from Daddy. Are you all with me on that? All of this is the case always. And this Newsweek magazine published already about 15 years ago. What is that down the middle of the magazine? That's the DNA ladder. I'm going to call it a ladder from now on, and it has rungs. Can you see the rungs? And you all know this. The ladder is twisted in opposite directions, if you will. And you may not know that in that ladder there are 3,200,000,000 rungs. And we didn't know that in the beginning, but it's known now. And the reason that Grandma, I'll use my arrow if you can see it, and the reason that granddaughter looks a lot like Grandma is because their DNA is even more similar than yours and mine. You all understand that, I know. So, this is somebody else's drawing. Can you see on the left-hand side? It's the same idea. Only this artist has tried to show you that the rungs are actually 2 half rungs. You all with me on that? He's colored them. Scientists, the same 2 scientists that got the Nobel Prize for discovering DNA learned this and other things that I'll mention. The artist has colored the yellow and the green as though they could fit together. That is correct. It's not a point in a little wedge, but the idea is correct. They chemically can hook together, yes, and even though they're not proteins. It's partly shape, and it's partly the orientation of electrical charges as well. But we won't get into that. And these 4 rungs are actually chemicals, and the letter is the first name of the chemical. I'm not even going to give the names. But the artist is trying to show you that the yellow is always hooked to a green, or a green is always hooked to a yellow. Did you see where I put my pointer? And by the same token, if you look over here where the C and the G are, you see the shapes. The artist has tried to help you see that it's a little different. And so reds are always hooked to blue or vice versa. You all with me on this? This was all learned by Watson and Crick, the 2 guys that got the Nobel. They didn't know all of this to begin with, but as time went on, they became famous for, and other people too. In fact, I shouldn't bother. Watson and Crick could never have done this all by themselves. It's a fascinating story. All the different things that different people had done, different scientists, including a number of females that made contributions that no one could ever have done what Watson and Crick did without all of that, which is typical in the scientific community always. Okay. Yellow and green and so forth. Now, just as in words where tile and light have the same letters, what makes the difference when you and I read them? The order of the letters. And it is the order of the rungs where that's the information. And the rungs have, it's an alphabet of 4, if you will, right? Not 26. You all with me in what I'm trying to describe? Some of you are not nodding, and when you don't nod, folks, especially I'm looking at you, it makes me feel like I didn't make it plain. Are you all with me on this? Okay. You got to talk to me with your face at least. The order of the 4 letters provides the information, or if you want to call it a pattern, or you could call it a code for a protein to be built. Got it? I'll show you that in a movie in just a minute or just several minutes. So if these rungs came in the order yellow, green, green, that's different than yellow, green, red. Just like words that we read. What is actually a function of a gene? I mentioned this last night, and it's on your card that you didn't read. Oh, I'm sorry, that's on your card that you read. Please remember this. What does a gene do? It has the information for machines in the cell to make a protein. And how many different kinds of proteins? It's about, the number is escaping me, but it's thousands of different kinds and millions of copies of each of those kinds in the cell for it to be able to live. So that's the function of a gene. Are y'all with me on that? It's like a pattern, if you will. So these instructions are used by the protein manufacturing factory. I'm going to show you a video of this to build or make or assemble the protein. This is a drawing of a cell with the top cut off, and the arrow is pointing to one of the factories where the proteins are manufactured. Can you see it? Little tiny dot? There's another one. See the little tiny dot? And over here, the artist actually gives you the name. I'm not interested in you worrying about the name, but it's pointing to some of those little black dots. What's your impression about how many protein factories there are in this cell? A lot of them. Hundreds of thousands probably in any one cell. And the factory has a name, it's not important. Now, you ought to know the name Francis Collins because he's kind of a sidekick with Fauci. Have you seen him on TV, Francis Collins? He's the head of the NIH. The NIH is made up of about 15 organizations. Heart, Lung Institute, this one, and the one that Fauci is in charge of, the infectious disease department. And Francis Collins is in charge of all that. He decides who's going to get the money, so very powerful guy. He himself was an atheist. He's a friend of Ben's. I learned this from Ben. He has become a believer because of what he's seen in the science. It's quite remarkable. The number one scientist in this country has become a believer that there is a God who made this stuff. It's amazing. Now this is Ewan Burney. I love this story. See if you can grab this in just a moment. How many rungs are there in the ladder? Roughly 3 billion. Y'all with me? As the scientists began to study the DNA, they learned how to locate a gene. A gene starts in one place and ends in another place. So there's a bunch of rungs that make up the gene. Y'all with me on that? And they were delighted. They kept finding genes. To their astonishment, they only found about 10 to 15,000. 98.5% of the ladder is not gene. How many had any idea of that? Can I see your hands? Boy, we're an uninformed group, aren't we? Do you understand what I just said? Most of the ladder is not what? It's not gene. And at first, Francis Collins said, it's junk DNA. He should have known better. God don't make no junk. Right? And it is now called, well, let me back up and just remind you. The way a scientist likes to say this is a gene codes for a certain protein. You got that? Like that's just they like to talk in ways that we can't understand what they're saying. That's their thing. But you understand what it means now. The gene codes for a protein. Are you all with me on that? So the 98.5% that he called junk is called the non-coding portion. Are you all with me on that? And it wasn't long before scientists, this is pretty new stuff, like easily within 10 years, that scientists began to figure out that the non-coding portion was functional, not as genes, but controlling the genes. The non-coding portion can turn a gene on or off. And what that means is, if the gene is off, the cell is not using that gene to make that protein. Y'all with me on that? If the gene is turned on, then the cell would be using it to make a certain protein, see? But Ewan Burney is the lead scientist of 400 elite scientists that are studying the non-coding portion to see what in the world is going on. And what's coming out of there is just fascinating stuff. It's called epigenetics. Have you ever, epigenetics, have you heard the term? Can I see some hands? Several of you, good for you. Now this book that Ewan has in front of him is from the 10 books that are up there on the shelf. Let me give you a close-up of the book and you tell me what you see. What do you see? Can you read from where you are? What letters do you see? A's, T's, G's, and C's. In all 10 of these books, how many A's, T's, and G's, and C's will be in there? 3,200,000,000. This is the genetic code. Are y'all with me on that? In a book available online. You'll have to run home right away and get some, right? But here's the point, folks. This is elegant beyond belief. Would you agree with me? Do you understand that neo-Darwinism, what does neo mean? New. You understand Darwin knew nothing of what we know today about chemistry and all of that. He was a bright guy and he did a great work. It's remarkable. But neo-Darwinism is this, that somehow in a pond, DNA formed, which itself, I say this kindly if you're not a believer, is ludicrous. How could you ever get by accident even the chemicals? You understand that each of those A's, and those are chemicals. And there's chemicals along the side that hold them. Y'all with me on that? The sides of the ladder. And how could by accident? Let me ask you a question. I don't have a coin. If you flip a coin, what's the chance that you get heads? You know where you get that 50% from? Let me explain it to you. You get that because you have one chance out of 2. And if you divide 2 into 1, you get 0.5, which your grade school teacher said you could write that as 50%. Am I right? All right. So let's say by accident that pond was able to make 1 rung pair. And how many different kinds of rungs are there? So let's say that by accident it was able to make another pair and even hook them together. What would be the chance that this rung is the right one? 1 out of 4. Right? And by the way, if you think about this, you'd know this. I'm just going to tell you that every time you have an additional probability, you have to multiply it. In other words, 50% chance of getting heads. What's the chance of getting heads twice? 50% of 50%. Y'all with me on this? You can teach grade schoolers how to calculate probabilities. You take the probability of a single event, and however many events have to happen to get a result, the probability of the result is the product, that's a fancy word for the multiplied, all of the individual probabilities. Y'all with me on that? You kind of got that? It's a simple idea. We can teach this to grade schoolers, and they can go home and make their parents say, what's going on in the school? Because the kids are way ahead of their parents. So, in other words, since there's 3 billion, that's 9 zeros, folks. You'd have to multiply 1/4 times 1/4 how many times to get the probability that the DNA would be correct? 3 billion times. It's ridiculous beyond belief, friends, that this stuff could have happened by chance. It's just insanity. But, and I say that kindly if you're inclined to believe the scientists as to how the origin of life came about. But if you want to have fun listening to somebody intelligent talk about origin of life, who should it be? Who did I recommend to you? Jim Tour. It's just fabulous. Even Neva listens to it. Now I'm going to show you a video of how it works. First of all, this thing across the top is the ladder split in half. Got it? By the way, that's called messenger RNA. You all know that term. We talked about that. And so all you actually need to make a protein, you don't have to have the whole chain. If you have half of it, and this is an A, you know what's over here, don't you? What is it? A T, right? Y'all with me on that? You're not with me? What do A's hook to? Only. Is that correct? So as far as the information is concerned, you only need one side of the ladder. And I'll show you how it happens, but that's why in showing you this actually take place, we only need one side of the ladder. Now the next thing I'll show you is this. I'm going to call this a truck. It's a transporting protein that carries, and on the nose of the protein, on the nose of the truck are 3 half rungs. Does that make sense? And it is the order of the half rungs that has the information. Are y'all with me on the idea? And so this truck is unique for an amino acid which corresponds to that particular set of A's and T's and G's and C's on his nose. You kind of got it? I'll show you how it works. But I want you to notice that the truck, it's a little bit like everything you order from FedEx. There's only one truck that can carry that item, and that truck is painted in a certain way or whatever. It's unique. So if you order 10 things, 10 different things, how many trucks will show up at your house that day? 10 different trucks. That's the idea here. Notice the half rungs on its nose, which correspond to the only amino acid it can deliver. So the amino acid is unique to that pattern on the nose of the truck. Now here starts the video. I'm going to turn off the audio for the moment. And I'm going to stop and start it. We're inside the cell heading toward the nucleus. The nucleus has holes that we call pores. The pores have a sentinel. Do you see the little ring with the pointers on it? Have any of you ever heard people worry about the fact that the messenger RNA in the vaccine might get inside the nucleus? Have you heard about that? If you haven't, you've heard it now. And the worry is that if it got in the nucleus, there is a protein, folks, that can take messenger RNA and make it into a ladder. That is to say, make it into DNA. Are y'all with me on that? And that DNA could end up in your DNA. Y'all with me on the idea? Now, we have told each other forever that the sentinel will keep that from going back inside. But just recently, within the last 3 weeks, a paper was published. This was in a Petri dish where the messenger RNA from the vaccine traveled until it found a liver cell and went inside the cell and got inside the nucleus. That's in vitro. It may not happen in people, but I'm just telling you, this was just published just about 3 weeks ago. Anyway, oh boy. I can't press the arrow for the video. I have to press the K key. But at least I hadn't gone very far. So, we're traveling with the camera in past the sentinel, inside the nucleus. Can you see the DNA? Y'all with me? And in a moment, a protein, this is interesting, a protein is going to come and cut the ladder in half. And if DNA has to be there to make proteins, where in the world did that protein come from? Are y'all with me on this? What did he say? What did Berlinski say? Every time we take another look at the cell, what do we see? Another layer of incomprehensible complexity. This is from an agnostic who isn't sure if there's a God or not. But of course, he sees the design. So, all right. Oh, I did it again. I'm going to try one more time to remember to press the K. All right. The K key. Usually I can do this if I quit talking or if I think a little bit. So there's the DNA. And in a moment, you'll see it being separated by a little protein that travels along there, breaking the connections. Here he comes. It's not a living creature. It's just a protein that's able to do it because of his or her shape, if you will. You understand what's just happened? Then another protein comes along and builds the other half of the ladder. See it happening? Are you all with me on this? Putting A's with T's and T's and G's with C's. By the way, this computer animation was done at Harvard. And you can get these. Lots of people have done this now. You can see it on YouTube from many different perspectives. I like Harvard's because in reality, folks, all of these molecules are vibrating. All of these atoms are vibrating. Did you know that? Only when it gets to absolute zero do they stop vibrating. And so the computer programmers have tried to make this happen. And it's a little hard to watch. So I like it without vibrating. Boy, I'll press the arrow key again. Now, watch this. That copy of the half letter is being removed. Got it? Are y'all with me? What this cell did is just made some messenger RNA, correct? And that messenger RNA is removed and is carried by a truck that they do not show along a highway that they do not show for simplicity. And the sentinel checks it, watch, and allows it to pass. Are y'all with me? I wish you would have said yes. Here it comes, and it is taken to the protein factory, the protein manufacturing factory. And the factory is in two pieces. And when I get to heaven, I'm going to biology class, and I'm going to ask a lot of questions. And one is, why is the factory in two pieces? But that's what it is. And the other piece is brought every time a messenger RNA is assembled. Here comes the other piece. It was carried there by a machine. Every machine, folks, in the cell is another protein. Hundreds of thousands of machines to do everything that has to be done. Besides making proteins, all kinds of other things in the cell are, in fact, the highways are built by proteins so that a truck protein can carry something from one part of the cell to somewhere else. And then another protein comes along and unhooks and undoes the highway. And the reason they have to do that, pretty soon the cell would be so full of highways, it would be stiff and it couldn't do what it's supposed to do. Another layer of incomprehensible complexity. Just mind-boggling. Now, inside, boy, I about hit the arrow key again. Inside the factory, here comes a truck with an amino acid, and it can be the wrong truck. If it is ushered away. But his A, G's, and C's, the three of them, whatever order they are checked with the messenger RNA to see if they're the right ones. Got it? And if that's the case, the truck is allowed to stay until the next truck comes in. Can you see that its nose is different than the first one? And that nose, can you see that that amino acid on the end of the truck is, can you see that this amino acid is different than this one? And this is an elegant thing that happens right here, if this truck is the right one, then this amino acid will chemically connect to this one. This is very hard to do in the laboratory. Very hard. In this milieu, it's just click, click, and it happens. Just like that. So now a chain of amino acids is being formed. Are you all with me on this? Everybody? And it has to be the right one. If any one amino acid is the wrong one, the shape of the final product will be adjusted and it can't do its job. You all with me on this? Why don't I quit saying that? Because you are with me, right? Okay, so this carries on. Blindingly fast, much faster than this. Do you understand how the code is working? The 3 letters, each 3 letters stand for a certain amino acid. Now, the programmers will take us outside, and I'm going to ask you a question. What is this thing right here? Speak up louder. That's the messenger RNA. Are you all with me? And what's this thing right here? That's the string of amino acids that are being assembled for this particular protein. I'm sorry that I've put some of you to sleep, but that happens to me all the time. You know when Neva reads to me in the middle of the night when I wake up and I can't sleep? I listen with my eyes closed. And I hear every word she says or reads. And when I wake up, I can't remember a single word. So you see the trucks coming in and the chain of amino acids coming out. There it goes. Now it's carried by a truck that they don't show to a factory where the protein is folded up. Oh, they all know what to do when they're supposed to do it. No, well, that's a good question. If anything quits functioning in the cell because it gets banged around too much, and that can happen, the cell will use the parts and make other stuff, and everything just keeps working. Quite remarkable. So now it's being folded up. Can you see there? They don't show this, but it's being folded up by some proteins that scientists call chaperones. And there again, who made the chaperones to fold up the first protein? I mean, frankly, folks, it's amazing that the scientists are so bent on not believing there was a creator. But it's changing. Do you know that Jim Tour said to me that up to 50% of the scientists now in today's America are believers in a designer creator? It's amazing what's going on. It's beautiful. It's just fabulous. Now, that's the finished protein, and it can do a certain job because of its shape. You all with me on this? And a truck finally comes along. They don't show you the highway, but a highway has been built for it to carry that to the place it's supposed to go. It's amazing, folks. It's amazing. There is so much we don't know. Did Berlinski say, we do not understand at all the chemistry in the cell? Remember when he said that? Berlinski is one of the smartest people in the whole world right now. It's astonishing. And he says, we don't understand it at all. I'm over the time, but this man's name is Dean Kenyon. He wrote a book. If you had your phone out, don't do it. You could, on Amazon, type in biological predestination. And you'll get the book that he wrote along with a Russian counterpart that claimed to show how this all works just on the basis of chemistry. No intelligence at all. Dean Kenyon is a professor at the UCSF, University of California, San Francisco. And He's in the top echelon of teaching these details. And he wrote this book. And it was heralded the world over as the answer for the evolutionists to say, this is it, this is how it works. And one day in this classroom, and I'll play a little bit of audio from him. It's got some music in the background that takes a few seconds to go away. A student raised his hand one day and asked Kenyon a question. And Kenyon said something like, "Good question, let me give some thought to that." And he went home and thought and started realizing that his conclusions in this book were wrong. And he has become a believer. And his book was heralded by the evolutionists as the answer. So let me raise up the volume a bit, Jerry. And it's real loud at first, but see if you can pick up his comments. And all I have to do, I think, is press this. Oh, boy. Oh. It was still the same thing. I should have pressed K instead. Okay, so we'll forget that. I'll just tell you, he's just saying, this is amazing. At this scale. And we have the details. These are his words of how this thing works. So, quite remarkable. And let me go on to the next slide. I'm going to quit now. I'm pretty much where I was planning to be with you. So we've looked at evidence for the layers, probably not nearly as old as scientists believe or have thought. Y'all with me on this? Those layers could have formed during the flood, perhaps in hours, right? The whole Grand Canyon, before it was washed, those layers could have formed in hours. And the fact that there's no erosion between those layers tells you. In fact, a friend of mine, she's a professor of geology, I've been to several classes with her, studied an area northwest of Los Angeles, up there in the hills where the Grapevine Highway goes through. Some of you know about that term. And the standard interpretation was this stuff was millions of years old. Her professor, after her studies, and I'd love to tell you more, but the time is up, he said to her, I think you're right. This whole thing probably took place in a few days. For evidence that she dug up. She literally dug up evidence. And so, very interesting stuff, folks. I hope you're blessed. Now, the next 3 nights, I'm going to study with you 3 problems. The cancer problem, the diabetes problem, and heart disease. I'm going to start with heart disease. Please don't miss this, and please bring friends. I think you'll be astonished to see what we know, what the public does not know, and what you need to know about these things. You say, well, I'm not heavy. I'm not going to get diabetes. The number one cause of diabetes, folks, the number one cause of dementia, of Alzheimer's disease, is diabetes. Most Americans have going on in their body what it is in diabetes that causes dementia. Are you all with me? I'm going to show you what that is. So even though the topic is diabetes, you're going to see what the issues are. So God bless you for coming after Neva thought I probably drove you all off last night with the... I thought I did a really wonderful job of explaining what was going on. Let's pray one more time. Father, we are marveled at your handiwork. Oh, my. And I pray, Lord, that it will help us just trust you and love you more. And of course, Lord, to be more careful with what you gave us, this amazing thing we call a human body, that you told us in the Bible you wanted us to glorify you with this body. So thank you. Bless us, I pray, in Jesus' name. Amen.